Ada, where did you find that?
In Emeka's old briefcase. It was stitched inside the lining.
Stitched inside? That's not protection, that's hiding.
The room's been locked for 11 years.
And he's been dead for 6 months. So why is that key still warm?
The smell is back.
The key was still warm. Chisom, feel this. My sister took it from my palm, turned it over once, looked up at me with careful eyes. Ada, this key is warm. I know. How is it warm? Nobody has touched this room in 6 months. My voice came out quieter than I meant it to. Emeka has been dead for 6 months. Chisom looked at the door, then back at me. She placed the key back in my hand slowly, the way you return something that doesn't belong to you. Where did you find it? She whispered. Stitched inside the lining of his old briefcase. Stitched inside. She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. Ada, he hid it. Or he kept it safe. Those are not the same thing. I looked at the door at the end of the corridor. The German lock. Silver. No rust. 11 years and not one spot of rust. Are you going in? Chisom asked. The smell reached us before I answered. Faint, chemical, sharp for a second, then gone like it had caught itself and pulled back, like it was warning me. Ada, Chisom grabbed my arm. We can call someone. We don't have to do this alone. We can call Pastor Emeka. We can call... No, you don't know what's in there. No, I said again. But I was his wife. Whatever is behind that door, I was his wife. I stepped forward. The key slid in cleanly. One turn, one click. And the door swung open like it had been waiting. One turn, one clean click like the lock had been oiled recently. Like someone had been maintaining it. Like someone had been in and out of this room long after Emeka Okonkwo Briggs took his last breath on a site in Auka on a Tuesday afternoon. The door swung open and the smell hit them like a held breath finally released. My mommy said, I can't reach 1,000 subscribers in 30 days. Please help me prove her wrong by clicking subscribe right now. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. My name is Adaize Okonkwo Briggs. And for 11 years, I was the happiest woman in Enugu. That's what I told myself. Every morning, while making Emeka's tea, while ironing his shirts, while listening to the Angelus bell from street. Teresa's cathedral drifts through our kitchen window, like God himself was saying, this life is good. Ada, hold it carefully. We lived in a quiet part of GRA, government reserved area, the kind of neighborhood where generators hum instead of roar, where gatemen greet you by name, and where your neighbor's business is conducted in whispers behind compound walls. Our house had 7 rooms. Emeka designed it himself. He was an architect. The man had a gift. He could look at an empty plot of land and see staircases, light, shadow, breath. He used to say, a house should have a soul, Ada. Every room should mean something. I believed him. I believed everything he said. We had 6 children. No, wait. I have to stop myself. We had no children. That was the one corner of our life that stayed empty, and we had agreed, quietly, the way long married people agree on painful things, that we would not let it hollow us out. We had each other. We had the house. We had 6 rooms that I cleaned, decorated, rearranged, and knew by heart. And then there was the 7th. The 7th room was at the end of the corridor on the ground floor. past the kitchen, past the small room we use for storage, at the very end where the corridor turned slightly like the house itself was trying to look away. Emeka built it last. He finished it 2 years after we moved in, and by the time the plastering dried, he had already put a lock on it. A serious one, German made, silver with no rust. What's this room for? I asked him that first time. He was standing in the corridor with cement dust on his trousers. He turned to me and smiled. That slow smile that started at one corner of his mouth before it reached his eyes. My study, he said. Your study is upstairs. This is my other study. I laughed. I actually laughed. Emeka, what does one man need two studies for? He kissed me on the forehead. One for thinking, he said. One for really thinking. I didn't push it. That was my first mistake. 11 years. That room stayed locked for 11 years. And in 11 years, I convinced myself it was normal. That architects were strange people. That creative men needed their mysteries. That love meant living space. But now, sitting here, turning everything over in my mind, I can see the small things I kept choosing not to see. The first one was the smell. Not strong, not alarming. But sometimes, in the evenings, when the air conditioning went off, I would walk past that corridor and catch something faintly chemical, sharp, then gone, like it never existed. I mentioned it once. There's a smell near that room, I told Emeka one night. He didn't look up from his newspaper. I use turpentine sometimes for my drawing instruments. I didn't know architects use turpentine. Ada, he folded the newspaper, looked at me with those patient eyes. Do you interrogate the cook about his spices? I went quiet. He went back to his newspaper. The second thing was the visits. Once a month, sometimes twice, a young man would come to the house. He always arrived in a plain white Toyota. No plate front, just the rear plates showing. He would park, knock, and Emeka would meet him at the door before I could even stand up. They never came inside together. Emeka would step out onto the veranda and they would talk low, fast, their backs half turned toward me. Then the young man would leave and Emeka would come back inside, carrying sometimes a small bag, sometimes an envelope, sometimes nothing at all, just his hands in his pockets and that quiet face he wore like a second skin. Who is that? I asked once. A junior colleague. He brings me side documents sometimes. Why doesn't he come inside? Because, Emeka said, sitting down, I didn't invite him inside. I told myself that was a reasonable answer. The third thing was the night. Emeka slept deeply, always had. The man could sleep through a thunderstorm, but maybe 4 or 5 times a year. I would wake at 2 or 3 a.m. and find the side of the bed empty, cold. The first time, I panicked. I found him standing in the kitchen, drinking water. The second time, he was on the back porch, said he couldn't breathe. The third time, and I only remembered this later, after everything I woke up and lay very still and listened, and I heard, faint as a heartbeat, the sound of a door clicking shut somewhere below us. I told myself I had dreamed it. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Emeka died on a Tuesday. Heart attack. Quick. Cruel in its quickness. He was at a site inspection in Auka and he simply stopped. One of the young engineers on site said he looked surprised more than anything, like the body had broken a promise. He was 53 years old. The burial was large. The kind of Igbo burial that pulls people from 4 states, that fills a compound with canopies and borrowed chairs and women crying in shifts. Emeka was respected. People came to bury him who I had never met, who shook my hand with both of theirs and looked at me with something that wasn't just grief, something I couldn't name then. I can name it now. The grief settled into me slowly after the guests left. That particular loneliness of a large house suddenly emptied of purpose. I kept all his shirts. I kept his toothbrush for 3 weeks before I made myself throw it away. I didn't touch the 7th room for months. I walked past it the same way I always had, with a slight acceleration of my steps, a small tightening of something in my chest. Then, one evening, my younger sister Chisom came to stay with me. She was helping me sort through Emeka's documents. The paperwork of death is endless. Nobody tells you that. And she walked that corridor for the first time. She stopped. "Ada," she said, "what's in this room?" "Emeka's study." "You've been inside?" "No." She turned to look at me fully. Chisom has a face that doesn't waste expressions. "Ada, your husband had a locked room in your house for how long?" 11 years. The silence between us was a living thing. "And you never asked him to open it?" I asked. "He said it was a study." "Where's the key?" I told her I didn't know, and I meant it. I had never seen the key, not once in 11 years. Chisom nodded slowly. "We need to find it," she said. That was the night the dread began to take a real shape inside me. We found it 2 weeks later. Not hidden, exactly, but not obvious either. It was stitched into the inner lining of Emeka's old briefcase, the one he carried before he upgraded to the leather one, the one I had set aside to donate. Chisom found it when she felt something hard through the fabric. She cut the lining carefully. The key fell into her palm. Silver, German made, no rust. We stood in the bedroom staring at it like it was something that had fallen from a different world. "You want me to come with you?" Chisom asked. I shook my head. I needed to do this alone. I don't know how to fully explain that, but whatever was in that room was between me and Emeka, and I needed to face it as his wife, not as someone's frightened sister. I walked down the corridor at 10 o'clock in the morning. In full daylight, I told myself I was not afraid. My hand said otherwise. The key slid in smoothly. The lock turned with one clean click like it had been oiled recently. And that was when I felt it. The warmth, the smell hit me first. Not rot, not decay, something chemical, like I had caught those evenings, but stronger. And beneath it, something else, something organic, like soil, like plants. I reached for the light switch. The room flooded with light, and I stood in the doorway for a long time without moving. It wasn't a study. It was a workshop. A long wooden table ran the length of one wall. On it, glass containers, beakers, rubber tubing, measuring instruments, small dark bottles arranged in careful rows. A shelf above it held notebooks, dozens of them, all identical, all labeled with dates going back 18 years. Against the opposite wall was something I hadn't expected. A large canvas, painted. No, not one canvas. Many. They were layered, stacked, and the one facing outward showed a woman I didn't recognize, standing in what looked like a garden. Her face tilted slightly upward, as if she was listening to something above her. She was beautiful. She was not me. I stepped inside. My legs carried me to the notebooks before my mind gave them permission. I picked up the one dated most recently and opened it. The handwriting was Emeka's. I would know it anywhere. But the words broke me open slowly, like something that knows it doesn't need to rush. March 3rd. Batch 7 has stabilized. Added the modifier at 0.3% as Chidi suggested. Results are cleaner than expected. If this works, Ada will never know how close we came to losing everything. If it doesn't work, she will know too much. I turned pages. June 12th. Chidi came again. He's nervous. I told him to trust the process. 15 years of research doesn't lie. The foundation already knows about the compound. They are watching the trials carefully. This could save thousands of lives, or it could destroy mine. Either way, I can't stop now. September 4th. I think Ada suspects something. She asked about the smell again. I gave her the turpentine story. I hate lying to her, but if I tell her the truth, she will worry. And she worries in a way that spreads, it comes out of her and fills a room. I need this room to be quiet. I sat down on the floor. My legs had stopped working properly. I read for an hour without moving. Emeka Okonkwo Briggs was not just an architect. He had trained as a biochemist, first I knew that, but he had abandoned it, or so I believed, to go into architecture when his father's firm needed an heir. What I didn't know was that he never stopped. For 18 years, quietly, in this room, he had been continuing a research project he started as a postgraduate student at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. A project about a compound, a naturally occurring molecule found in certain West African plants that showed extraordinary potential in slowing the progression of sickle cell disease. He had a partner, Chidi, the young man in the white Toyota, not a junior colleague, a fellow researcher younger, brilliant, operating out of a rented lab in Abuja. They were trying to do something quietly that the pharmaceutical world does loudly and expensively. They were trying to save lives on their own terms, outside the machine, because Emeka had watched his sister die from sickle cell complications when he was 19, and he had never, not for one day, let it go. I didn't know he had a sister. She died before I met him. He had never told me. And that particular silence, that one I couldn't stop crying about. Not the locked room, not the secret research, not the 18 years of chemical smells I hadn't questioned hard enough. It was the sister. It was the grief he carried that I never knew to carry with him. But I wasn't at the end yet, because as I kept reading, the notebooks shifted. The entries from the last 2 years were different. Still about the research, yes, but something else had entered the writing. A weight, a specific, particular weight. October 11th, the foundation has made their offer again. Full funding, international trials, a team of 20 researchers, everything we need. All they want is the compound formula and to register the patent in their name. Chidi wants to take it. He's tired. I understand, but if we hand this over, it stops being ours. It stops being Ngozi's. Ngozi, his sister's name. October 30th. I've made a decision. I'm going to refuse the foundation's final offer. Chidi won't like it. The agreement we made was that decisions are unanimous. But I can't do this. I can't hand Ngozi's memory to men in suits in Geneva. I'll find another way. I always find another way. The next entry was 2 months later, January 9th. Chidi hasn't spoken to me in 6 weeks. The foundation has gone quiet. I'm not sure what that means. I've started keeping copies of everything off-site, just in case. Then, 43 days before Emeka died, February 14th, Valentine's Day. I made Ada egusi soup because it's her favorite. She was happy tonight. She doesn't know how happy that makes me, not her happiness alone, but the fact that she is untouched by all of this. She is the one clean room in my life. Ada. I have kept her clean on purpose. If anything happens to me, she should know that. Everything in the room explains itself, but she is the reason the room exists at all. I stopped reading. My chest was doing something I didn't have words for. I looked around the room again with different eyes. The paintings, the woman in the garden. I looked closer and I realized she wasn't a stranger. She was me. A younger me, maybe from a photograph Emeka had taken early in our marriage. He had painted me from memory or from image, and placed me in a garden that didn't exist, looking up at something above the frame. He had painted me over and over, in different lights, different angles, like a man who couldn't stop looking at something, like a man keeping something safe. I called Chidi 3 days later. I had found his number in the final notebook, written there deliberately, with a note beside it. If you are reading this and I am gone, call him. He needs to hear from you more than you need to hear from him. He picked up on the second ring. When I told him who I was, there was a long silence. Then he said, Mrs. Okonkwo Briggs, I've been waiting for this call. How long? Since the funeral. I wanted to come to you. I didn't know how. We met in Enugu a week later, a small restaurant near the university. He was younger than I expected, early 30s, quiet eyes, the kind of stillness that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time. He ordered nothing, just water. He told you about the compound, I asked. He told you? I read the notebooks. Chidi looked at his water. Then you know almost everything, he said. Almost. He looked up. Emeka didn't die of a simple heart attack, he said. I mean, the heart attack was real, but the stress that caused it. He stopped, pressed his lips together. The foundation sent people to pressure him, not violent, nothing you could report, but calculated. They showed up at his sites, they made calls, they implied things. For the last 3 months of his life, he was under a kind of pressure I couldn't protect him from. I kept my face still. I had learned to do that in the days since opening the room. Why didn't he tell me? Chidi looked at me for a long moment. Because, he said you were the only thing in his life that hadn't been made dirty by any of this, and he was going to keep it that way until he died. The irony of that sentence sat between us like a stone. Until he died. Until he died. What happened to the research? I asked. It's here. He reached into a bag and placed a hard drive on the table. He couriered me a copy 6 weeks before he died, said if anything happened, I should continue, but that the original, everything in that room belongs to you. He pushed the hard drive toward me. He wanted you to decide, Chidi said, what to do with it, where it goes. He said you were smarter than both of us, and we were idiots for not asking your opinion from the beginning. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I did neither. I picked up the hard drive and held it with both hands. I didn't sleep for several nights after that meeting. I lay in our bed in the dark and I talked to Emeka out loud. I asked him questions I couldn't ask when he was alive because I didn't know I had them. Why didn't you trust me? Why did you think protecting me meant hiding from me? Don't you know that I would have carried it? That I've always been able to carry more than you thought? The room was open now. I had left the door open deliberately. At night, I could see the faint outline of the corridor from where I lay. Where before, there had been a wall in my mind, a place I had learned not to look. Now, there was just space. open breathing space. Chisom stayed with me through those weeks. She would bring food and sit without speaking, which is the greatest gift one person can give another. One evening she asked, "What are you going to do with it all?" "Continue it," I said. She blinked. "You? Not alone, with Chidi. And I'm going to find a university partnership that keeps the patent in Emeka's name, in Ngozi's name." Chisom was quiet for a moment. "Ada," she said, "you didn't even know any of this 3 months ago." "I know," I said, "but I know it now." Word spread the way it always does in Enugu, slowly, and then all at once. People heard about the room, about the research, about the compound. A journalist from a Lagos publication reached out. Then a researcher from Unilag. Then, a woman whose son had sickle cell disease, who heard the story through a friend of a friend and called me weeping at 9 p.m. to ask if it was real. I told her it was real. I told her we are working. I told her to give us time. The foundation sent a letter. Formal, legal, careful. They were still interested. Their terms were different now, perhaps, because they understood who they were now dealing with. Or perhaps because the story getting out had changed the landscape. I handed their letter to a lawyer. I didn't respond directly. Some rooms, once opened, cannot be locked again. And some fights, once inherited, cannot be set down. 6 months after I opened the door, I renovated the room. Not destroyed, renovated. I kept the notebooks, I kept the equipment, catalogued and organized. I kept every painting Emeka had made of me, and I hung the largest one on the wall where I could see it when I walked, because I walk in there now. Every day, the research continues. Chidi comes to Enugu twice a month, not in a white Toyota without front plates, but in whatever car he's driving, parking openly, coming through the front door, sitting at the table with me over the notebooks and the data, while the smell of whatever we're processing mixes with the Enugu evening air, drifting in through the window I've left permanently cracked. The compound, the one Emeka spent 18 years on, the one that carries his sister's ghost, has entered its first formal clinical phase. A small one, a careful one, but real. It has a name now. We named it Ngozi. I tell you all this not for sympathy. I tell you this because of what happened the first evening I sat alone in that room, in the chair Emeka must have sat in for hundreds of nights, surrounded by the work of his secret life. I looked at the lock on the door, now permanently open, the German-made lock that had never rusted in 11 years, and I understood something. He hadn't locked it to keep me out. He had locked it to keep the world out. He had built a room for the things too important to risk, and he had put his research in it. Yes, but he had also put me in it, in the only way he could, in paint, in brushstroke, in a woman in a garden, looking up at something just above the frame. The room was never hidden from me. It was built for me. He just ran out of time to explain that. The last notebook ends mid-sentence. He was in the middle of an entry about a modification to the compound, something technical. I've since had explained to me 3 times, and the sentence just stops, mid-word. Like a man who set down his pen to go look at something and simply never came back. I've read that last page more times than I can count. I never finish it. Because as long as it stays unfinished, the work isn't over. And the work, I have decided, will not be over for a very long time. The key lives on my desk now. I keep it in a small ceramic bowl my mother gave me. It's always warm. I've stopped finding that strange. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. Subscribe if you haven't, and drop in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And tell me, have you ever discovered something about someone you loved that changed how you understood every year before it? See you in the next one.